So please give me a minute.
Yes, please.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are. Please proceed.
Okay. So a very good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, New Delhi, and the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai, I welcome all my participants and speakers to this webinar on current pandemic, community crisis and gender challenges in developing countries. So at the onset of the program, I would like to thank our patrons, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, who is the Executive Director of National Institute of Disaster Management, and Professor Dr. N.S. Santosh Kumar, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University, Tamil Nadu Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. Our patrons, both our patrons have constantly been with us, and it is for their support and guidance in organizing this webinar that we're able to deliver this product to all our participants. So just, just establishing the context of the webinar before we have the welcome address. There was a study from Maharashtra recently reported in the newspaper in which they had analyzed the gender-based mortality rate of the second wave of the current pandemic that we are facing. Now, on the basis of the gender disaggregated data, they found that the mortality rate of men was almost double the mortality rate of women. This is how gender has played a role in this pandemic under which we are reeling currently. While men have died more, that means the number of deaths of men are almost double the number of deaths of women, the socio-economic of the pandemic has greatly been experienced by women. There are a number of ways in which they are experiencing this pandemic. Now, as per the social norms, all of us know that, in most parts of the country, we have a gender-biased society. And men are generally the earning members of the family. Now, the mortality rate of men being more, meaning that and in those cases where we have single earning members, the deaths of, men are leaving the families to be taken care by women who perhaps did not previously have this experience, and now they're currently facing the challenge for earning for their families. Added to this, we had the lockdown period, in last year as well as in this year itself. There was a suspension of all the activities, and there were women who were working from home. We don't have a good representation of women in the formal sector. Anyways, there were women who were working from home. So they had to undertake all the household work in the absence of the domestic helpers like maids and drivers, which were normally available to them. With schools closed, the children were at home, and the task of taking care of children along with, the work from home that was being generated from the office was increase the workload to a large extent. In this period, violence against women also increased in the first wave as well as in the second wave. The National Commission for Women has reported increase in calls to the helpline numbers, as well as, there are a number of complaints that are being made through emails regarding the increased domestic violence. In some cases, it is said that, the women are saying that I'm in lockdown with my abuser. So those relationships which are already at risk, there's increased domestic violence in those cases. Apart from domestic violence, the violence against women has also increased. Why? Because perhaps in this current pandemic, digital option is the only option that is available to us. So now we have, the cases of, harassment against women, blackmailing of women, trafficking, online. It has increased because, many children and, many women and the other members of the society are, using these online digital platforms. And so the traffickers now, they never had any geographic boundaries, and they don't have it either. So sitting in any part of the world, and women, people have already lost their livelihoods, that is already under stress. And under this stress, what is happening is the mode of trafficking and other violence against women cases are increasing through online medium. That is another aspect that women are facing. With the exodus of migration from the cities to the villages, it is expected that there will be a further decline in the women labor force participation. Already the labor force participation was less, but now it is expected to increase. And lastly, with the health infrastructure, which has been overwhelmed by the corona patients, the non-COVID women patients, they could not access medical help for their reproductive health issues. And, UNICEF says that, over 1 million babies are going to be, delivered this year. But pregnant women, they're facing a harrowing experience. They're very scared and in a state of panic to deliver children in such perilous environments. So keeping, the gendered impact has been huge, on men, on women, and keeping this, keeping this in context, both NIDM and Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, we decided that it was very pertinent to organize this webinar on community crisis and gender challenges in developing countries. So I would now request Mr. Karpuram to invite the speakers to deliver the talk. Thank you so much. Over to you, Karpuram. Mr. Karpuram.
Good afternoon to all. It's audible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I would thank for
video is not switched on.
thank you. Okay. Thank you, ma'am, and thank for all participants and all speakers. I would welcome Professor ma'am. Ma'am, initiative for those things come this kind of forward kind of thing. So first of all, I invite our patrons, Professor N.S. Santosh Kumar, Vice Chancellor, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, our NITM Executive Major General Pendra. So I invite our welcome address Professor Dr. Balaji, Registered Tamil Nadu Ambedkar University, and Speaker Mr. Gauthaman Ranganathan, Assistant Professor, O.P. Jindal Law School, New Delhi. Second speaker, Professor K. Sharvani Ma'am, Professor, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. Our third speaker, Ms. Delfino, LGBTIQ activities, Nirgal. Final, our vote of thanks, Dr. S. Rajalakshmi, Head of the Department, Criminal Law and Criminal Justice Administration, Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. I would invite all our speakers and participants. Welcome to all. I hand out to our host and then I invite Professor Dr. B. Balaji for our welcome address.
Thank you so much, sir. I thank Dr. Rajinder Walia and Mr. Karpu for the introduction. With profuse thanks to our Vice Chancellor, Professor N.S. Santosh Kumar, sir. We are grateful to NIDM for having associated with Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University for having organized this webinar, which is a need for this hour. I now request Dr. V. Balaji, Registrar in Charge, ACE academician and a gifted educationalist who have contributed to the university at various levels and designations. I now request Dr. V. Balaji sir to address the gathering. Welcome and deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Madhaji. Am I audible, loud and clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. A warm good afternoon to one and all. I welcome you all to the webinar on the current pandemic, community crisis and gender challenges in developing countries, organized by the Tamil Nadu Ambedkar Law University in association with the National Institute of Disaster Management. At the outset, I welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N.S. Santosh Kumar sir, the distinguished patron, Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, my esteemed colleague, Dr. K.S. Shabani, Webinar Director, Professor Rajalakshmi, HOD, Department of Criminal Law, Dr. Ajin Walia, Assistant Professor, NIDM, New Delhi, and Karku, Co-Coordinator, and Mr. Rahul Raghu and Madhavijayan, Assistant Professors of Tamil Nadu Ambedkar Law University. I also welcome the honorable members of the Syndicate, Academic Senate of the Tamil Nadu Ambedkar Law University, Controller of Examination, Director, Research and Publication, heads of all the departments, and faculty members of the Law University and affiliated law colleges, and my beloved students, School of Excellence in Law, and my administrative staff. Now, today, our distinguished patron, Major General M.K. Bindal, is presently the Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, who is an apt, towering personality who head such an institution. After seeing his great academic profile, where it has shown that he is an alumnus of the National Defence Academy. Major General is a graduate of the Defence Services Staff College and has attended the prestigious Higher Command course at the Army War College, besides excelling in all other career courses in the Army. During his 3 decades of service, he has held very important command and staff assignments. Having held all echelons of command within an air defense regiment in diverse theaters, he commanded an air defense regiment and an air defense brigade in the Kashmir region against the backdrop of counter-insurgency operations. He was also commanding a sensitive sub-area in the northeast. He has been staff of the Mountain Brigade deployed in the counter-insurgency ops in the high-altitude area, an armored division deployed in the plains, a desert corps, and a corps headquarters in the high-altitude areas. He was also being posted as Deputy Director General in Directorate of Army Air Defense, where he was dealing with the operation, training, air defense, control and reporting, and air intelligence issues. Major General also served as the Provost Marshal in the United Nations mission in Mozambique, where he was deeply involved in the liquidation of the mission. He has been the Director, Center for United Nations Peacekeeping in New Delhi, and for 3 years he was also the Secretary of the International Association of Peacekeeping Training Center. That's what I was mentioning, that he was a covering personality to head such an institution. Sir, on behalf of the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, the Vice Chancellor, the faculty members, organizers, and all students, I welcome you, sir. Next, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor N. S. Santosh Kumar, sir, who, before becoming a Vice Chancellor of the University, was a syndicate member, a long-standing syndicate member of our university, as in the capacity of the Directorate of Legal Studies. He is simple and humble, and the Vice Chancellor is very keen to have many such programs, the academic programs, that what you are now witnessing, and you want to develop the university as such. He has given a full freedom to the academic faculty members to carry on any academic activities like collaboration with the institutions like NIDM and various other institutions. And is taking care of the welfare of the students of the university and instrumental in many academic programs happening now in your university. Sir, I thank for being with us always and inspiring us to achieve greater heights. And Dr. Ajinder Walia, who just now spoke because of some other preoccupation, I think she had completed and left, I believe. So, Madam is Assistant Professor NIDM New Delhi and coordinator for this program. And Madam is PhD in Sociology and joined NIDM in May 2003. Prior to this, she had worked at Khalsa College, Ludhiana. She has a deep interest in various social issues of disasters, such as gender and disaster, needs of children disaster, community-based disaster preparedness, and disaster mental health, etc. And I welcome all the speakers of today, Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan, Assistant Professor, OP Jindal Law School, New Delhi, a Fulbright Fellow, and LGBTIQ activist. And my esteemed colleague, Professor Dr. K. Sharwani, Madam, who is also now with the speaker, one of the speaker. The another speaker is Miss Delphina, LGBTIQ activist from Nirangal. We are all eagerly waiting for your resourceful speeches. I welcome my esteemed colleague, again, Professor Dr. K. Sharwani, who is a speaker today, but also she's the director of this webinar and is also the former syndicate member of this university. And Madam is very dynamic and has adorned various positions in our university, academic and administrative, and conducted many academic programs in our university. Welcome, Madam. And I also welcome my esteemed colleague, Dr. S. Rajalakshmi, Head of the Department of Criminal Law, who will be delivering the vote of thanks today. Welcome, Madam. And a few points about the National Institute of Disaster Management for the sake of benefit of the participants, where we are having a collaboration with. The National Institute of Disaster Management was constituted under the Act of Parliament with a vision to play the role of premier institute for capacity development in India and the region. Under the Act of 2005, NIDM has been assigned nodal responsibilities for human resource development, capacity building, training, research, documentation, policy advocacy in the field of disaster management. One of the very much needed institute in India, the NIDM has performed a crucial role in bringing disaster risk reduction to the forefront, which is its national agenda. The institute works through strategic partnership with various ministries and departments of central, state, and local governments, with going towards academic research and technical organizations in India and abroad, and other bilateral and multilateral international agencies. The NIDM is proud to have a very strong multidisciplinary core team of professionals working on various aspects of disaster management. The institute also provides various facilities, including providing training to face-to-face or online and self-learning mode, as well as satellite-based training. NIDM provides a capacity building support to various national and state-level agencies in the field of disaster management and disaster risk reduction. The institute core vision is to create a disaster resilient India by building the capacity at all levels for disaster prevention and preparedness. Now, this is a very welcome trend, and I hope that the university has gone in the right direction and have a collaboration with the NIDM, and where we are conducting this program at this point of time. Once again, I welcome you all and thank the organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity to deliver the welcome address on this occasion. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, before getting into the session, I request all the participants to mute yourself and not on your video any time in between. And the questions, we are anticipating questions which will be beneficial to all the community at large, but we would like to restrict all the questions to the question and answer session allocated at the end of the session, end of the webinar, put together for 3 speakers, right? That will be around 3:40. So I would like to reserve your questions for the question answer session, right? Moving on to the first speaker, I would like to introduce Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan, Assistant Professor of Legal Practice, OP Jindal Global Law School, New Delhi. Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan engages in critical legal scholarship, and his work examines the material impact of the law on people marginalized on account of their gender, sexuality, caste, and mental health. He has taught undergraduate and postgraduate courses in family law, law and justice, and social justice, lawyering at National Law University at Jodhpur and New Delhi. Previously, he has worked with the alternative law firm Forum Bangalore, the Center for Social Justice Ahmedabad, and the Office of Advocate Sudha Ramalingam at Chennai. As a human rights lawyer, he has worked extensively on the rights of transgender persons and on advocacy and litigation of decriminalized homosexuality in India. He has provided legal assistance and representation to survivors of domestic violence, LGBT persons, and sex workers in Bangalore and Chennai. Speaking on his academics, he holds a graduate degrees in law from the University of Texas School of Law and Asim Premji University. At the University of Texas, he was a Fulbright Nehru Scholar and was also a human rights scholar at the Rapport Center for Human Rights and Justice, and an MD Anderson Research Fellow at the Institute of Transnational Law. His undergraduate law degree is from the National Law School at Bangalore. I would like to mention that he is multifaceted. He is a prolific writer too. He engages himself in poetry in his spare time, apart from cycling. I now request Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan to deliver his first session on impact of disasters on LGBTIQ community. The dais is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction, and a very warm welcome to the distinguished guests and all the participants. It's indeed a to be here today to share a few thoughts about disaster management and the LGBT rights. And I really look forward to the question and answer session, and to also joined by my friend Delphina, who will also add on to some of the points that I have to say. So let me get started right away with the substantive issues that I want to state. If there is any question, any clarification, feel free to also put it in the chat, so that if there is, so that I address them as in when I go, if they are very fundamental to things that I'm saying. So the plan for the 20 minutes that I have today is really to give a broad background to LGBT rights in country so far, to see how the kind of constitutional aspirations that have been endorsed by the institutional courts, including the state high courts, as well as the Supreme Court of India, need to be realized at all stages of our governance, including very crucially in disaster. So I try to focus as to how we can use policy when we understand that the lives of LGBT persons are slightly different from the head people, who is often the assumption of a law making. They often focus on cisgendered people who are assigned a particular sex at birth, and they identify subsequently, and also people who live in a union in a household. So, uh, BTRs, Amphan, and so on. And And I really appreciate that the panel is kind of titled in the global south, because there is a very specificity of India and the larger South Asian context when it comes to LGBT rights, which is important to take into consideration. So very basic kind of clarificatory comment is that, so LGBT, there's a lot of confusion with regard to terms and terminologies. Um, I see a comment that my communication is breaking. Is it all right, or should I try and change something? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me all right? I see a comment that says communication is breaking.
Yes, sir. Yes,
So
sir.
I just want to make sure that my voice is clear.
Your audio is weak, actually.
Sir,
Okay.
Mr. Gautam, the
Okay.
voice and video at times breaking, so just take care.
Okay, let me try without the earphones. Maybe that might be
Yeah.
better. Hello, can you hear me all right? Sorry. Hello.
Please start speaking some.
Yeah, if you can hear me.
Some of voice increase.
Okay,
It's
let me.
audible.
Sir, the problem should be with the internet, I guess, not with the audio.
Okay. I hope it gets better as I speak, and I'll try to speak slowly so that the disruption is not too bad. So I was just saying that I would start with some clarificatory comments on the terminologies. Often there is a curiosity that people. Oh, thank you. That it's I see a comment that now it's okay. So there is a requirement for clarity, because there's a diverse kind of terminologies that are used in the context of LGBT rights. I often just say gender and sexual minorities, or gender and sexually diverse people, which allows to take into consideration very many identities in the subcontinent, including indigenous kind of socially and culturally specific identities like the Hijras, Tirunangais, Jogapas, who are trans feminine communities in India. So LGB refers to same-sex desiring or both sex desiring people, and also transgender is really people who identify with the gender that is not assigned to them at birth. And like I said, there are very many categories of Indian or South Asian identities like Kotis and Aravanis and Tirunangais, Jogapas, who are in the South Asian context, who identify in the trans feminine category, which is really people who are not assigned, female at birth, but go on to identify as female, as women, and also trans men who are assigned male at birth, but identify as assigned who are assigned female at birth, who go on to identify as male. So really a large section of identities that we speak. So lesbian, bisexual, transgender. Oftentimes you will hear the word queer, which is really an attempt to reclaim this idea in the Western context in the United States of America, where queer was seen as a very derogatory word, and kind of people reclaimed it by saying it with dignity back to those who were calling them queer, which is really weird. Call somebody weird. But in the Indian context, I usually say gender and sexual minorities, or gender and sexually diverse people. The law reform when it comes to gender and sexually diverse people in India, as some of you might be aware, has really progressed substantially since about 2009. And it continues to make progress, including as recently as a week ago, when the Madras High Court gave a decision that said that two consenting adults who were in a lesbian relationship should not be stopped by their natal family to pursue their desire for each other. right? And in that context, there was a lot of attempt to ensure that these two women don't move out of their house. So as you can see, as Professor Ajinder also pointed out, during the pandemic, when there's a lockdown, it gets really difficult for people to leave the house. So if you are in the house in a context where the family is against your choices, you don't have an option to leave the house, and you are constrained within the four walls of the house. And that becomes a problem. So that's the most recent kind of judicial pronouncement that is before us in by the Madras High Court, right? And it really, what I want to do very quickly is to trace some of the decisions that have come out, starting from really April 2014, in the case of National Legal Services Authority versus the Union of India. There's a crucial decision because it said that transgender people have a fundamental right, have fundamental rights. It affirmed the fundamental rights of transgender persons under the Constitution of India, including the right to equality, right to non-discrimination, and the right to freedom of movement, right to expression that includes gender expression, and so on and so forth. This decision also very fundamentally said that it is there is a right to self-determine your gender. That is, that nobody should be asked to go through medical, hormonal, or surgical processes to identify in the gender that they affirm themselves. And really, that right is that of self-identification. So if a person says, I identify as a woman, though I was assigned male at birth, or that I am a man, though I was assigned female at birth, they should be allowed to identify as such, right? And the Nalsa decision also gave very important guidelines to the central and state governments, right from HIV treatment to livelihood means and so on, and very peculiarly, very importantly rather, recognized transgender people as belonging to the socio-economically backward class, right? And we are still realizing some of the goals the Nalsa judgment set out, and there are an implication to that for disaster management that I come to shortly. So after the Supreme Court's decision in 2014, you also had the decriminalization of homosexuality in 2018 in the case of Navteej Johar, which was a landmark judgment of the Supreme Court that said that Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, that kind of can be used to criminalize same-sex sexual acts, must be read down to be not constitutional. Right, and all this led to a lot of discourse around LGBT persons, both in the media and in the legal discourse, in the legal discussions, where kind of there was a need to recognize the equal citizenship of people who were different, right? And subsequent to these two landmark decisions, you have the high courts in different states really carry forward the aspiration of these judgments, furthered the Constitution of India. So the high courts have followed these two judgments in many cases, right? And these cases include admission to police services, admission to medical colleges and engineering colleges of transgendered people, providing protection to same-sex couples who are leaving their house, and so on and so forth. Right? We even have the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court recognize the marriage of a transgendered woman with a cisgendered man. And what was of crucial importance is that marriage was also an intercaste marriage, and the court said that we must, kind of direct the relevant authorities to ensure that their intercaste marriage gets kind of financial support, as would be the case with many other intercaste marriages, a policy that the Tamil Nadu government follows. So one would say that, well, there is so much progress that has happened, in law reform. So I haven't things changed drastically, radically. Are the LGBT people still marginalized? Is a question that might come to our mind. And what I want to point out is that, yes, we have these aspirational documents and decisions that guide us, but at the ground, there continues to be a lot of concerns that LGBT people, especially LGBT people, gender and sexually diverse people belonging to lower socioeconomic background face. And these are questions of livelihood, questions of uh, you know, education, employment, and so on and so forth. And that's really where the disaster management context that I want to bring in, right? Substantial research has shown, and Professor Ajendra will kind of corroborate this, is that disaster disproportionately impacts people from a lower socioeconomic background, right? And in the context of gender and sexually diverse people, their poverty and their social exclusion by their gender and sexual identity in various contexts, right? And similarly, the recovery from the disaster is also slow and prolonged when it comes to people who are marginalized, right? So I want to just highlight some of the points that happened around both the pandemic, but not just limiting to the pandemic, but also when it comes to, say, cyclones and so on that we have seen in the recent past. And then I want to conclude my comments, and Delphina will take forward some of the issues that I lay out for us to discuss, right? First is really on the pervasiveness of violence, which I'm sure Professor Sarvani will also elaborate on, is really the fact that domestic violence has been recognized as a shadow pandemic during our times right now, where people who are kind of caught up inside the house do not have an escape, and they have to share the space with abusers. In the context of gender and sexually diverse people, oftentimes the violence comes from the natal family or the family that they are born into, and sometimes this violence might not be intended poorly, right? In the sense, the intention of the parents might be good, that they might not want their children to face persecution, they might not want their children to suffer, therefore they want them to use a very loaded word, quote unquote, they want them to be normal, right? But sometimes these well-intentioned kind of actions might have very severe setbacks. For instance, you have instances where conversion therapy has been administered. We have a terrible case just about a year ago of a young woman who passed away because she was trying to resist conversion therapy by the family. And conversion therapy is really this outdated and unscientific method to try and change people who are different when it comes to their gender and sexual identity, right? And there is, of course, and sometimes there is even intimate partner violence within LGBT communities. Just because people identify as gender and sexually diverse, gender and sexual minority, doesn't mean they don't have the regular wear and tear of relationships. So kind of domestic violence in intimate partner relationships is also something that happens. And also the gender dysphoria, a kind of a term that is used to suggest the experience of transgendered people who are forced to dress up or express the gender that they choose to not recognize as, is continues to exist sometimes. So to tell a trans woman pant is really very mentally harmful, and during the pandemic that could cause a problem. I see, Professor Jinder, your hand is up. Do you want to ask something right away?
No, sir. Sorry about that.
Okay. No, that's all right. So as you can see, there is and even if you choose to leave the house, there is a prevalence of violence in the public sphere. For instance, criminal law was used, as some of us know, very widely to enforce the lockdown measures. And what happened with gender non-conforming people was that that they faced violence in the public sphere by the law enforcement when they had to leave their house to seek livelihood, right? And similarly, if you follow the news, there was an instance in Hyderabad where there were posters that were pasted everywhere that said "Stay away from trans women." There were derogatory words used, and it said that they carry corona, so if they come to talk to you, beat them up. right? And kind of a very clear incitement to violence, right? And sources of livelihood are limited, especially for socio-culturally specific transgender identities like the Tirunangais, the Hijras and Jogapas and so on, who oftentimes have to take recourse to traditional means of livelihood, like seeking alms, traffic signals in return for blessings, or as it is called as badhai in the North Indian context, which is to, bestow the blessings to young born children in marriages to get money. And given the lockdown situation, and the fact that social distancing required that that marriages don't happen, these livelihood means were. Sorry, I think there is somebody's mic which is on. Could I request it to be muted? Okay. So the livelihood means of collecting money by bestowing blessings was gone. Similarly, the livelihood means of, say, taking to sex work was also gone. Therefore, there was a very severe issue with regard to a loss of livelihood. So with threat of violence, with loss of livelihood, and with increased pressure to evictions, they were unable to pay rents. All this kind of came together, to make case under people very bad, right? And I just want to quickly close with two observations. One is that even though that there are these progressive decisions of the Supreme Court and the High Courts, you continue to have laws that criminalize begging, laws that criminalize sex work, that use as people, and we must ensure that these laws go away so that they can actually not be persecuted or prosecuted, right? And especially in the context of pandemics, when they lose livelihood, are oftentimes required to hold on to traditional means of livelihood. And finally, I just want to say that even when cyclones and so on occur, the very fact that many transgendered people live in government land which do not belong to them, in temporary settlements, it makes it very difficult for them to emerge from the adverse effects of the cyclone when, say, their house gets blown away and so on, because they don't have the adequate documentation and so on and so forth to rebuild, and oftentimes have to take recourse to NGOs and so on, right? I would urge Delphina to cover issues with health access and so on. High courts have stepped in substantially both in Karnataka, Kerala, and also in Tamil Nadu to make sure that the COVID relief reaches to transgendered people, which Delphina will comment upon. But at the heart of it, the one point that I want to emphasize is that disaster management should look beyond the people that they rescue, help, despair, from a very narrow heterosexual, heteronormative, to recognize that there are people whose lived experiences are very different, and their lives must also be taken into account when we plan for disaster management. I think I have just about. I'll be happy to take questions in the question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for making the content crisp within the time and well delivered. Thank you so much, Mr. Gautaman, sir. The second session is on shadow pandemic by Professor Dr. K.S. Sharwani. Dr. K.S. Sharwani is currently a faculty of Department of Interdisciplinary Studies, School of Excellence in Law, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai. Madam holds 2 doctoral degrees, PhD in History from Ethiraj College of Women, University of Madras, and PhD in Law and Interdisciplinary Studies from Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai. With 2 decades of unbeatable teaching and research experience in the university, Professor Dr. Shavani has authored 5 books and conducted many national and international conferences, webinars, and has presented papers in
around 30 seminars, both national and international. Since 2003, she has been the editor of the newsletter of the Law University and is also the editor of the Ambedkar Law University Journal, ALUJ, from 2010. As a multidisciplinary person, her area of interest includes gender studies, development studies, and human rights. Apart from academic work, Dr. Sharwani served as a member in the Law University Syndicate, Senate, Research Board of Studies, UG Board of Studies, Coordinator for Law Admissions for Law University courses and law colleges in Tamil Nadu. She has also adorned the seat of Director, School of Excellence in Law. A teacher is Brahma. They preach, they create knowledge, they help in sustaining the knowledge, and so Vishnu, and they act as Shiva by throwing off ignorance. I hope we are all blessed to be teachers. I request Dr. Sharwani ma'am to deliver her lecture on shadow pandemic.
Thank you, my esteemed colleague, Mr. Marudha Vijayan, for your elaborate introduction. So, pleasant afternoon to everybody. The topic on which I'm going to speak today is about shadow pandemic. What is this about shadow pandemic? For the past year or so, we have been hearing about pandemic, COVID-19, corona, shutdown, lockdown, but not many would have heard about shadow pandemic. So what is this? There is a connect between COVID-19, the pandemic, and the shadow pandemic. So let me start the narrative from COVID-19 on the pandemic that we know. So as we all know, Wuhan's wet markets in China, from there, a strange virus started. It was an epidemic. And from behind the iron curtains of China, we could get few glimpses of people falling down dead in the middle of the road, and people screaming and gasping for breath. So it was a strange sight. And we also saw the military closing and sealing off the doors of flats and apartments and individual houses with startled and scared victims peering from behind the windows. So the world was not very sure of what was happening, but it was in December 2019, January 2020. Now, within 2 months, what is an epidemic became a pandemic. So travelers from and to China, they were the carriers, and one person can be the carrier for the entire community. Like the Chinese cheap goods, it swarmed the entire world, and now we are still in the grip of the pandemic. And by March 2020, the entire world, the nation states, decided that lockdown was the only sensible option that can be had for the world. And because it has had a huge impact on health and wealth of nations and the states, and there was no known cure for that. Even the way the pandemic, even the way the virus reacted, whether it was a virus or not, was also not known. So the pandemic, from the pandemic, we have the shadow pandemic. What's the shadow pandemic? As the coordinator for Delhi, Madam said, shadow pandemic is an offshoot of the pandemic. It has increased violence against girls and women who have locked up with their perpetrators. The question I ask is whether violence against women and girls, is it something new? No. Discrimination against women and girl children is as old as the oldest human civilization surviving. So it's not so new a concept. Why should the UN take note? The United Nations Women, UN Women, as a body that its executive director, Fumzile Mlambo, she was the first to give a hint to the world. Look out, there is the shadow pandemic. In a press note, UN Women on 6th of April 2020, remember only in March 2020, the world shut down. So on 6th of April 2020, the UN Women released a press statement stating that there is violence against women during the pandemic and it's called a shadow pandemic. And down south in Tamil Nadu, when you look at the police reports, the Amma Patrol Wing of Tamil Nadu Police Crimes Against Women and Children, the report that they give us, the number of distress calls to women helpline between in 2019, before May 2020 is 15,000, and the distress call to Childline during the same period was 1,500 calls. So now, whether the pandemic has affected women or whether it has not affected other genders. See, the socio-economic, cultural, political impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, has had a huge impact on all the nations of the world. But its impact from the developed to the developing to the underdeveloped countries vary. And despite all that variation, in all these countries, whether they are developed or underdeveloping or developing countries, the women have been disproportionately affected in all these areas, in all these spaces. So when we look at that, there are a few points that we have to note. Why women have been discriminated? Amartya Sen, in his award-winning work, has stated that many cultures have the habit of active inclusion, positive inclusion and negative inclusion, positive exclusion and negative exclusion. So the inclusions and exclusions that happen in a man-made world where the rules are framed by the men for the men and other genders have to follow suit. They are below. So like a gender apartheid is something which is rooted in every culture. How is it rooted? We are the carriers. Conditioned upbringing ensures gender stereotypes. So what are gender stereotypes? For example, in every home you'll see, you're a boy, you shall not touch the broom. You're a girl, you have to do this. You shall not do that. You're a boy, you shall not cry. You shall do this, you shall not do that. So the do's and don'ts from the childhood, the upbringing, that is called as conditioned upbringing. So by conditioning the mindset of the people, the many layers of a person's thought process that is, impacted by the people around, by the society, by the close society. There's a family, the extended family, and then the social norms and customs, and then the government rules and regulations. So conditioned upbringing ensures gender stereotype. I'll give examples for that. And then when we talk of gender apartheid, it is a man-made world for the benefit of man. And so every culture, every religion speaks highly of male supremacy, of the son. There is son preference and daughter abhorrence. It is like two sides of a coin. Like every culture says that men, that only sons can take forward the family legacy. Daughters, they're like bringing up daughters is like watering the neighbor's plants, neighbor's garden. So we don't get returns. Son is the one who takes our legacy forward. So it's better to have a son. And so it leads to some preference in daughter abhorrence. The gender apartheid includes that, and the conditioned upbringing also. It leads to many exclusionary practices. Some of the exclusionary practices are feticide, infanticide. Down south in Salem, Dharmapuri, and other areas in Tamil Nadu, there is an infanticide belt. So feticide, infanticide, child marriages, forced marriages, strict widowhood conditions, then sati system, then honor killing, Many things. Name it, you have it. All those negative things which are given to women. And one more thing is that women are considered as secondary, but the family's honor depends on the women's conduct, the women's activities. So the family, like in any family, if a girl is raped or physically she's abused, then the family is never used to come out of that. They never used to reveal it because it will affect the marriage prospects. And dowry system. In the marriage market, there is something called as suitable. The suitable or term is something which denotes no equality. The women's side are more than the men only in economic aspect, then that is good. But in other aspects, whether it is education or other things, the woman has to come down. That is the suitable match. It is understood by everybody. We need not explain that. So, there are many problems that women face in the society, and why should we talk about it during the pandemic when lives are being lost just like that? People are dying just like that. Here, along with that, women's status, because of its secondary status, she has to bear more problems. She has to endure more problems. And when our nation's 50% of the population is backward, is affected, then the nation's forward development is severely dented and affected. And its ranking in the world is also severely dented. It also has an impact on the skewed sex ratio. Okay, I'll just give you a few instances of this gender apartheid. For example, the census report of 2011. Remember, the census report is something which is done by the Parliamentary Commission, the highest legislative body. And the census report of 2011, 21 has not yet come. There are many categories, and there is one category for non-economic activity. And in that, there are four categories of people who are grouped together. So as Amartya Sen said, first group them and then discriminate them. Right. So that category includes those who collect the rents, then beggars, prostitutes, and housewives. See, when a woman dies, when a housewife dies in an accident, the same husband goes to the tribunal and seeks the highest money that can be given because of so much of work. So all the work that she does is jotted down and converted into monetary relief. But when she is living, she is given secondary status. So a woman, whether she is living or dead, he's an asset to the family, and the family is a drain on the woman. In most of the cases, not always. Then, condition upbringing, gender stereotypes. So this is the mindset of the parliamentarians, the body, like those who frame the laws, the legislators, the parliamentarians. Now coming to the judiciary. Geeta Hariharan's case still, as per the Guardianship and Rights Act, mother does everything. She bears her entire structure, her physical being, her health, everything is affected when she gives birth to children. But when it comes to guardian in India, father is a natural guardian. And in the Geeta Hariharan case, they said that it's a great thing for women. But what did the court do at that time? The court said that the mother can also be considered as a natural guardian in the absence of the father. But there are certain states in backward Africa where, even in Malaysia, both the father and the mother are the natural guardians, Malaysia, Singapore, other countries. So here that is denied to women, where in the land where women is deified. Then, there are many cases of atrocities committed against women during the pandemic. That is the reason why it reached the UN and they directed the state. So few incidents I will recollect and narrate to know all these, the mindset of the people. A pregnant wife's abdomen slit open. It happened on September 21, 2020 in UP. They had already 4 girls. She was pregnant, 5 or 6 months. And a soothsayer told that person that, like, if the next child is also going to be a girl. So the husband wanted to abort the child. But the lady refused. So one day, in a fit of rage, heavily drunk, he came home and he wanted to find out whether the soothsayer is right or the woman is right. And how to find out the truth? You have to see the child. So he slit the fetus, and inside, unfortunately for him, it was a male fetus, and the child died. And the abdomen, everything, the uterus, it was ripped open, and with great difficulty that woman was saved. And the doctors in their report said the women can no longer go in for childbirth. Is a woman a childbearing machine? That's one question. Then, honor killing. There's another title. Dad hacks teen girl to death for fleeing home. Right to marriage is there in all international conventions, even in India. But then here, an 18-year-old girl who wanted to marry a boy from another community, her father refused. He said, no, it is against the izzat of our family, our honor of the family. You cannot do that. So she left the home to the boy's house. There, the boy's father contacted the girl's father and said, she has come home. What to do? Shall we do the next step? Then the girl's father came there. Probably will think of the task. He came armed with a sickle, and then he chopped her into pieces, then and there, in full public view on the streets. And then there was no remorse. He said, I brought her into the world. I have right to put an end to her when she goes against the family. So a woman is still a property with no worth in the marriage market. And then Devadasi system, many of us would have heard about it. Like it was banned in 1947 in Madras Presidency, and then in Karnataka in 1982, and then Andhra 1980s, and then Maharashtra also, where it is well spread. So normally girls of 7, 8, 9 years, they are dedicated to goddess, the dagger, or any item of the god, and from then on, they are called as dasis of the god, devas, dasis, servants of God, and they're not supposed to marry any mortal man. Slowly from religious work, they started catering to the lustful men. So when the girl attains puberty, this was a pre-puberty ritual. When the girl attains puberty, a huge function will be held where she'll be auctioned and in the village, and they'll keep her as a concubine. She cannot marry, but can be kept. Normally in the month of Magha Paurnami, which falls in February, in Saundatti village in Karnataka, to this day, on the slide, they were asking, this marriages are being conducted. A senior Dasi ties a tali for the girl. And during the lockdown, one girl contacted the police. She told them that she was 19 years, not the age for being dedicated. So she was 19 years. She said that my parents are ready to give me to send me for this. So kindly help me. The police said, okay, let them do. We'll come on that time. And they went, they rescued her, and they got her married to that girl, and they left. So these are some of the atrocities. And infanticide, the moment some problem comes, no bleak economic future, the first thing that they do is put an end to the girl children. And now not much of data is coming out. And so many calls have come. Many people have not been able to go out and tell. So their voices are muffled and silenced because people are there at home. The husbands, they're not getting their, whatever substance they are using or drinks. Okay. So it's time for me to go to the next one. So with schools, offices, daycare centers, old age homes, everything cancelled. For women working from home and for women with no work, things are very, very difficult. Now let me talk about UN Women. United Nations established UN Women in July 2020. It's the United Nations entity working for the empowerment of women, and it's headquartered at the Commission of the Status of Women which was established in 1946. And this Commission on the Status of Women and UN Women, they are the global watchdogs. So what is the duty that they do? They collect data, report to the UN and to the state parties, and then suggest reforms and issue directions. And during this pandemic, UN Women received so many reports from all parts of the world. In Delhi, in all parts of the world, they have the headquarters. Delhi headquarters serves 6 countries, including India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So in each and every state, in each and every district, they have their reporters who report. So UN Women receives a report from all parts of the world, and they reported that there were 1,500 cases of domestic violence from 24th March to 30th May 2020, the reported cases. And in this article, Violence Against Women in the Shadow Pandemic, UN Women Executive Director warned that, I quote, with 90 countries in lockdown, 4 billion people are now sheltering at home from the globally contagious of COVID-19. A protective measure, but a deadly danger. A shadow pandemic is growing. And UN Chief Antonio also appealed for a ceasefire against domestic violence after the horrifying global surge in domestic violence. And on 27 May 2020, UN Women launched a shadow pandemic public awareness campaign in New York. Kate Winslet, the Academy-winning actress, narrated the domestic situations in 14 different homes, the physical and mental abuse faced by women. And the film highlights an alarming upsurge in domestic violence and ends by urging the society to help the victims. The campaign included social media accounts, advice about local shelters, helplines, NGOs, police welfare organizations, etc. And the UN Women and UN issued guidelines to state. What is it? It told the states, adopt a survivor-centered approach. See, hospitals are taking in only COVID victims, but when the victims are bleeding, one victim reported that her husband and in-laws hit her with a gas cylinder. And they have so many burn marks and blood, broken bones. So they also need to be treated. They cannot wait. They may die in that process. So they said, adopt a survivor-centered approach and provide online support, and told the governments that shadow pandemic is to be given equal priority along with pandemic. And it also stressed on providing equal revival package to be given to women. To conclude, I would like to talk about the Supreme Court's novel decision on March 25, 2021, when it was talking about the Army women officers discrimination. And it said indirect discrimination test has to be put. Discriminations are multi-layered and seeped in every cell of the people. To ensure equality and accord protection to the vulnerable, we have to understand the varied layers of discrimination in structures of our society created by males for males. And the norms have been deeply ingrained in patriarchal custom. So it's time to ensure that there is gender equality. We have to end gender apartheid, lock, stock, and barrel. If nations have to go ahead, they have to protect their people. And so I conclude by thanking the organizers and all those for listening to my lecture. Thank you very much. Good day. Over to you, Martha Vijayan.
You are no doubt a repository of knowledge, ma'am. Thank you for the session, ma'am. Next, coming up next is session 3 by Delphina. Ms. Delphina is a LGBTIQ activist. We humans have commonly categorized ourselves into men and women, and common isn't normal. We need to recognize that not everyone fits into this binary model. Though gender equality and women empowerment is assured in black and white by law, we live in a society where men and women are not yet treated equally in all situations. We have amongst us who state it is a common sense that we need to look beyond this binary. We have Ms. Delphia to deliver the next session. Ms. Delphia is blessed to be associated with social organizations such as Orinam and Nirangal, Chennai for the last 5 years. Nirangal seeks to promote the human rights of the marginalized communities with a focus on LGBTIQ community to bring about a positive social change. Ms. Delphina's responsibility at work include documentation, developing resources for training programs, communication, and coordination. Mention worthy, Delphina is also a trained playback theatre artist. I welcome you, ma'am. I
Thank you.
request Ms. Delphina to deliver her lecture on impact of lockdown on LGBTIQ community, economic and psychological aspects. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Professor. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And how much time do I have?
20 minutes approximately,
20 minutes.
plus or minus.
Thank you. Thank you, respected dignitary, my friends. Thank you. And let me get to this. I would like to talk about the impact of the lockdown. And the first thing that comes to my mind is that we should be actually doing this in a physical space, if not for this lockdown. And we have, because of whatever lockdown, we are forced to do this online. And I think overall, we haven't really, as a society, as a community, I don't think we have really considered the vulnerabilities of digital data and privacy. Even I agree that okay, Cisco WebEx is much more secure than maybe not, or maybe not as scandalous as Zoom or Facebook, but still, why are universities and national institutions not owning the software and the infrastructure that delivers it? That's just something I wanted to mention. But let's get to the topic of how the lockdowns have impacted the LGBTIQ community or communities marginalized because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Again, the first lockdown that happened last year was something that we had no time to plan for, no notice. I think it was imposed on the entire nation with a 4-hour notice, and it left all marginalized communities more vulnerable. We know that in general, transgender and queer people are much more uh, mobile, and they do not always stay with the families of origin. They do not have the, in India especially, I think in general, I would say in South Asia, we do not have institutionalized social security, and family happens to be the support structure. But for a lot of LGBTIQ people, families are not this, are not safe spaces, and it left a lot of people stranded. In terms of how it has impacted the economy, we think again the specifics will vary from subgroup to subgroup, because when we talk about LGBTIQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities, there are different identities, different uh, groupings within it. But broadly, yes, the economy has been affected for all of us. We are at a historic low in terms of the where the economy is, but it has disproportionately affected marginalized communities. So, give some examples, when it comes to trans women, the majority of trans women are at least in the institutionalized trans subculture, they either make money by clapping hands and asking for money from shops, or by standing in the street and soliciting clients for sex work. This has been the traditional sources of livelihood. Although I understand that now a lot of trans people are into other jobs as well, and that's a good thing. But when it comes to going out and asking for money, to soliciting alms, with all shops closed, with no economy functioning, it's where are they going to get the money, and who is going to give them the money to live? I understand that there was some limited government and non and then private charities trying to help, but when a national lockdown is imposed at 4 hours notice, was there any planning for what the trans people needed for the next few days? I don't think so. So further, even when the shops reopen, when trans people go to clap hands and ask for money, it is many of the trans people, we are seen as carriers of virus, carriers of disease. referencing back to what Gautaman said, that there is a stigma against the trans community as people who spread the virus. Although we know that with SARS-CoV-2, it is human-to-human transmission, and the occupation or the uh, caste or the religion of the person doesn't change the probability of transmission. The trans people are more likely to be seen as carriers of the virus than other people, and so they are less likely to be received, welcomed in by shop owners or other people who might be otherwise, if not for the pandemic and the lockdown, willing to give money. And when it comes to sex work, yes, some trans people are trying to do some limited sex work online, but it is a challenge. And again, there are serious questions about safety and security of online communications for trans people. But also, there is they have been used to doing sex work on the street, and even after the lockdowns are over, there is because of the continued stigma also there is no interest for customers to come, and it is also risky. I think sex work has always happened underground, and they feel even more threatened with with having to deal with both anti-trafficking laws and the COVID protocols. On the whole, this has left trans women without any means of livelihood, but on the positive side, there is some recognition of the needs of the trans women. So both governments and private charities have come forward to provide some help. But in this, the big challenge is that it has been dependent on having the required proofs of identity. Trans women who do not have identity cards have not been able to avail the schemes. And for the most part, transmasculine people have not been even factored in at the policy level. For example, in Tamil Nadu, only very recently has the welfare board started issuing identity cards for trans men, that is, individuals transitioning from female to male identity or masculine identity as opposed to male to feminine trans people. And across the community, the LGBT people, whether they are trans men or trans women or gay or lesbian people, are more likely to be stigmatized and discriminated at workplace. And when there is a cut down of jobs, when they are more likely to lose their jobs, and that is actually happening. So in terms of economy, yes, it affects everybody economically, but trans people are disproportionately losing jobs. Not only trans people, LGBTIQ people are disproportionately affected economically in terms of both job losses and in terms of inability to access government schemes because of lack of identification documents. Even when it comes to interventions like vaccination, the government until today, I think there has been an announcement that COVID registration is no longer mandatory, but people are asked to register in a digital portal, giving a proof of identity, and a lot of people do not have the identity documents or have it in a gender and name that they do not feel comfortable sharing with, even to access healthcare, and they may not lack the resources to go online and do the registration. So this has again been a area of discrimination that even as we are going toward the end of, hopefully reaching the end of the lockdown regime and opening up, access to vaccination still remains a challenge because of the digital apartheid of the state in insisting that on documents. And yeah, there has been a positive change with the recent Supreme Court judgment, and I hope the government takes full note of the court judgment, but it's, I feel, too late and too little in terms of the damage that has been done. The other major concern, as Professor Savani, who spoke before me, mentioned, there is an increase in domestic violence, and this again disproportionately affects queer people, especially people who are assigned female identity at birth, because queer women, lesbian and bisexual women, and even transmasculine individuals are at disproportionate pressure to get married to male partners chosen by their parents against their wish. And this has always been there, But when people were living in different cities, earning some money, they were able to somehow resist the pressure from the families of origin. But when they lose jobs, their choice is to either starve on the streets or go back to families of origin where continue to be harassed every day, pressurized into marrying, and sometimes into conversion therapy. I think that is something the advocate Gautaman has already touched upon. The other challenge that we saw is that while government help was too late, too little, and there were private charities who were more than interested to help, there were a large number of hurdles for non-governmental organizations and private charities to go ahead and work. Unlike, for example, the Chennai floods or other disasters where we had relative freedom to plan our work, the strict COVID protocols and the need for paperwork even to take up charitable activities was overwhelming for most people who wanted to do something. Additionally, amidst the confusion of the pandemic, a regressive uh, transgender protection bill was passed without any proper consultation with the community, or only online consultations in which only the most privileged and the affluent of the community, who are not representative of the needs of the entire community, participated. Because of the lockdown, we are going to see for decades to come a trans legislation which is not reflective of the interests of the community. And without an opportunity to protest or express a voice of dissent to this draconian manner of lawmaking. I do not know what was the urgency to pass a trans bill rather than provide uh, actual facilities for the trans people who were stranded because of the lockdown without insisting on identity cards. Then we also see that with trans men, there is no inclusion in any of the schemes. Trans masculine people have not been factored in, or and they continue. We still do not know what is the way forward in terms of how the facilities are going to reach. There was also additionally the burden of changes to Fcra regulations which related to foreign contribution, and a lot of small charities that were depending on foreign money were unable to receive the money, or even if they received during the lockdown, we were told that we cannot make cash transfers to the beneficiaries, but we were also at the same time the procedure to get the permission to go and distribute the material in person was so burdensome and so complicated that it was not possible to complete it in a timely manner. And because of that, more marginalized people were left without support. Feel there has been, in that sense, a suspension of the constitutional rights, of the right to liberty, and the right to and all the fundamental rights that are enshrined in the constitution. And not only did the government fail to take care of the needs of the marginalized communities, including LGBT, specifically the trans and the LGBTIQ communities, but also there was undue interference in the manner in which private charities and voluntary organizations could address some of the gaps in the between the needs of the community and the mitigation efforts undertaken at a policy level. Whereas the first lockdown was a surprise and something that we were unprepared for, the continued lockdowns in some form or severe restrictions in some form or other over prolonged periods of time of over a year have left the population at large with an extreme level of fatigue, which is also disproportionately affecting the trans community and the LGBTIQ community. Even small organizations trying to raise domestic resources are unable to raise any funds for the welfare of the affected community members, because at this time there is the economy is all-time low, unemployment is at an all-time high, and there are hardly any interested people who are able to give money for charity. And we are still dealing with the complications of receiving foreign money since the FCA changes happened last year. Uh, the supposed aim of the lockdowns were to help improve healthcare infrastructure so the society could be reopened safely. But I do not know, and I would be like maybe somebody in disaster management who has more expertise can later on comment on it as to how much has the how much of investment has gone into the healthcare infrastructure since the first lockdown happened till now, and if that was not significantly more than what the previous year's investments were, which is what I think is the case. What was even the purpose of the lockdown? I feel that in a broad sense, lockdowns were neither necessary nor useful, and they worked as Professor Sunetra Gupta, a the theoretical epidemiologist from the University of Oxford, says lockdowns have worked as focused protections for the rich and the privileged, where the people who are privileged who could do work online could carry on without any interruption, while the marginalized communities, both the communities marginalized because of socioeconomics and those marginalized because of their sexual or gender identity, and there's a significant overlap between the two as well, continue to bear the brunt of the lockdown restrictions. Amidst this, we have also seen that mental health has been the biggest casualty for the community. Firstly, people are being forced to live at home. For example, in our intervention, we saw that there was one trans man who said that he wants to, after maybe once the lockdown is over, he's able to go for a job. He wants a job where he has to travel a minimum of 3 or 4 hours. We asked him, like, why do you want to travel? He said, I have no choice but to stay at home with my parents, and my parents torture me all the time. But the only way I can escape the torture is to have a reason to be outside home, a legitimate reason, and that would be travel to workplace. So I want to wake up and leave before anyone sees me, and I want to come back and crash at the night after everyone is sleeping. So this is the level of discomfort. This is okay, one narrative, but this is the level of discomfort that a lot of community members have. And with the families of origin, and the lockdown has again left a lot of people vulnerable without jobs, and because of housing discrimination as well, they were forced to vacate the houses, unable to find other homes. At least as an interim measure, they had to go to families of origin where their parents and relatives continue to torture them every day. And in terms of mental health interventions, again, there has been a major challenge in that a lot of people, a lot of organizations have come forward to set up helplines and online counseling, but it is not really effective because, okay, when the community members want to come for therapy or counseling or something, they do not have a safe space at home where to sit and take the call. They are being monitored and surveilled at home all the time. So, on one hand, community members have to deal with the pressure of continuous surveillance by their immediate family, and at the same time there is also the when it comes to online spaces there are larger issues of digital surveillance, of corporate uh, control, and of state surveillance as well, in the sense that okay, I think I would maybe like to look at, maybe conclude by saying that yes, we hope the lockdowns will end, but I think some aspects of online communication are going to remain. And the push for this digital portal like COVID, the push for digital communications without any considerations of the underlying issues of privacy and security, like schools and universities kowtowing to corporates to use, makes people use software without disclosure about the risks of data collection and privacy violations, is something that is still continuing. And all of this, maybe this the survival has been the first thing for the trans and the LGBT people. Survival and just the ability to be free of stress for a few hours is something that is so prestigious and so uh, rare and precious at this time that we may not as a community come have raise a voice against the other issues. But amongst the shadow pandemic is also the pandemic of loss of privacy by digital surveillance that is happening at in an unprecedented manner in the current times. So in all and any type of such surveillance and data collection will be again used to target and uh, marginalize the most stigmatized and discriminated communities like LGBTIQ and trans people. Therefore, it's quite complex. I do not know if I could do justice to all of that in the limited few 20 minutes of time, but we have to stop somewhere. And I feel the need is to look uh, at least stay. I would leave you with the question: what can the government do to protect what can the governmental organizations do to protect the interests of the most marginalized groups, and also to be pragmatic and acknowledge that not every need can be anticipated for and fulfilled by the state, but if we can allow private charities and voluntary organizations to work without undue interference. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Delfina. I didn't expect the session would comprise of this crisp content, that it emphasizes the actual state of LGBTIQ people. I would like to take the reference from the vision of War-Inam organization, which would and should come into reality the sooner the better. The vision of the organization is to have a world where individuals of all sexual orientations, genders, and sex characteristics are able to access their human rights free of any discrimination. Wish the day comes so soon. Thank you so much, ma'am. And next is the question and answer session. I would like to invite questions from the participants to be posed to the speakers.
Can I just add a comment to?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Yeah, okay. I would just like to, we've had so much of discussions on the LGBT community and the transgender population. A lot of research studies from across the world in Indonesia and other parts of the country, they have really shown the good work that the transgender population has played during disasters. So, they have been involved in the search and rescue issues, and they have, they had gone to the relief camps. They have provided, psychosocial care by, giving haircuts to the survivors, after which the survivors felt very happy, organizing recreational programs. So this is also the role, the transgender population in lot of times, they played the role which as per the norms, they're played either by men or women. So they played both the parts, in serving people. So that is one good part, we need to highlight about the role which the transgender population has played across, the world. And even in this pandemic, in northern part of the India, in the first lockdown, when there was a huge exodus of migration, people were traveling on foot, across the states, we could see that transgender population had also organized relief camps for them, where the migrated community would stop by, and they would be delivering them with food and other water. So this was one good thing, which we also need to highlight, was the role played by the transgender population in disasters. And the second comment that I would like to make is the role played by women in disasters also need to be highlighted. If we go through, the studies and the reports, we find that, in many countries who have actually managed the COVID-19 very well, they were headed by women, which included Germany, New Zealand, Finland, and Taiwan. And the second role that, the women have played is 70% of our global health force belongs to women. So who were the COVID warriors? The COVID warriors were women, and these were women who were performing long duties in the heavy, those PPE kits that they were wearing. Menstruating women, they could not even change the PPE kits because, in the earlier days, it was really, they were in paucity. But they continued, dealing with the COVID infected people, and they were our frontline warriors. So the role that the women have played, the role that the transgender population has played, has already been documented in disaster discipline. So I would also like the participants to take note of it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. A question to Delphina ma'am. Do you think there must be a separate law for LGBTIQA rights in India? Delphina ma'am? We shall reserve this question.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. I couldn't earlier. Okay.
All right, ma'am.
No problem. So do I think there should be a separate law? Broadly, I don't think so, because I think that what LGBT people need is fundamentally the same as what all of us need, which is protection of fundamental rights, of right to life, liberty, the right to freedom of speech and expression. And I think if these are fully upheld, I don't see a need for having a very separate legal framework. I mean, there could be some specific provisions that could be there for LGBT, but okay. Even if we look at the Supreme Court judgment on Nalsa versus Union of India in decided on in 2014, it clearly says that the trans people should be recognized and they should be given affirmative action for or some sort of a uh, there should be some sort of affirmative action for the historic injustice done. But beyond that, what needs to be done is to ensure that all constitutional rights are accorded to them. So in fact, I think whatever little lawmaking we have seen of separate laws for trans people, like the transgender bill, have been done with hardly any community consultations and seem to be creating more confusion than benefit. So I feel that a robust legal framework that guarantees the constitutional rights for everyone should be sufficient, and any needs to specifically protect the interests of LGBTIQ can be there in the uh, implementational level in terms of the rules for implementation rather than creating a parallel legal framework separately for LGBTIQ.
I totally go with you, ma'am. Legal formulation and impositions are all secondary. First is to have a right mindset among people. When that is there isn't any need for a separate law which should be imposing the deliver of rights. Next question to Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan. What is improvement for women's lives, sir?
That's a rather broad question, but if necessity to that, I'll be happy to elaborate. Yeah, but I mean, there is a vision of gender justice and equality. So I could frame it in quite many ways. So if I request the person has raised that question, we narrow down the question. But for me, the improvement would really mean the sense of substantive equality which our constitution, or rather the judicial interpretation of our constitution has set out, which is that was not just a formally, but also taking steps to ensure that there is substantive equality. So to not just say that men and women are equal, which could run the risk of saying that men and women are the same, but to recognize that you need to do certain extra effort, which actually connects to the next question that has been raised to Delphina about reservation for the transgender community. I will let Delphina respond to that, and then maybe I can add to it later.
Thank you, sir. Delphina ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you,
Any
Gautam.
other
So on the question
question,
of
Madhavijan?
okay, actually, these are questions in which I'm sure that Gautaman, you can also add on. In fact, both the questions, so I'll keep my response brief. But in terms of reservation or affirmative action, I first think that any reservation is a sort of an interim solution. It's not the ideal endpoint of how a society should be organized. And So it may help in terms of some level of social acceptance, but I think what is more important in my perspective is non-discrimination. Reservation can be there in some specific situations for specific subgroups, but I don't envision a comprehensive LGBTIQ reservation because the identities are so varied and complex that not everyone might benefit from or be eligible for such a type of policy. And I also feel that there is no need for segregation. I feel like inclusion is, I do not believe in the doctrine of separate but equal, which was actually what President F.W. de Klerk advocated for in South Africa, where he said, okay, you can have whites and blacks with separate schools but equal status, equal quality of education. I do not believe in it. I think we should include LGBTIQ people in the mainstream institutions. Over to Gautaman and the host. So.
Yeah, thank you. I just have very quick points. One is, yes, I agree with what has already been resonated about not requiring a need for a separate law. I always say that, that more laws does not mean more, equality or justice. Sometimes these laws do not really trickle down to the people who need it the most. And so what we already have adequate legal structures that needs to include, concerns of LGBT persons. And of course, the 2019 Protection of Rights of Transgender Persons Act is a classic example, as Delphina pointed out, which is a law that wanted to give legislative shape to the judicial aspirations of the Nalsa judgment, but actually went contrary to the Nalsa judgment. And now there is a case pending before the Supreme Court of India challenging its constitutionality. And also the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in 2014 released an excellent report. It's called it's a report by the Expert Committee on Issues Faced by Transgender Persons, which says that, you could do it in two ways. You can either keep on segregating and having newer laws, separate schools, separate so and so, or you integrate into the society and so on. And kind of the MSG suggested the latter in as many things as possible. And the second question on reservation again is important because we must understand that transgender is not a kind of monolithic identity. There are also transgender people who are Dalit. So there are also transgender people who are persons with disability. There are transgender people who are Muslims, right? So, in fact, when the Nalsa judgment said that transgender people should belong to the socioeconomically backward class, a lot of Dalit transgender people said, it's very difficult. We cannot have mobility, upward mobility. We cannot suddenly become OBC if we are born as Dalit and we are trans. And Living Smiles Vidya's book, Nan Saravanan Allah, I am not Saravanan, or I am Vidya, and kind of Grace Banu's recent work on being a trans Dalit person has speaks volume to it. And what is worthy to note is that when the member of Parliament Tiruchi Shiva drafted the first draft of the transgender rights protection bill, back in 2000, late 2030, early 2014, that bill actually had suggestion for 2% reservation for trans people, not just in the public sector but also in the private sector, which was a radical move given that we don't have reservation in the private sector for anybody. But unfortunately, MSG did not accept it and then created a different law, which has now become a very watered down law that has been challenged. So I do think that reservation is an important tool to achieve, progress, and especially when it comes to intersecting identities like Dalit trans people and so on.
Thank you, sir. Another question, ma'am. In this institution, how does the act of begging, prostitution, or social situation wanting to be a nomadic or move from one place to another justify? COVID situation needs all the preventive measures from spreading the infection, which I presume is not supporting any of the above needs. What can be the best solution? Please guide.
Thank you, Professor. So, and thank you for the question, Uma Maheshu. Okay, I would, in our LGBT community generally, we work with the framework of consent, right? There is risk awareness and consent. So are we supporting or not supporting? That's not the point. I'm not saying that people should do this or not do this, but whatever they choose to do should be with full awareness of the risks and full consent of all parties who are involved and all parties who will be affected. That I know is a little bit complex when it comes to COVID, because you say that, okay, somebody can get the virus and this person can get, but there has to be some respect for risk awareness, and we have to also contextualize risk from the point of view of the person who is vulnerable. Because I think for many of us who do not have other risks, COVID might be the highest risk and our entire attention might be on that. But for somebody whose choice is between going into a crowded place and getting exposed to the virus or not having a nutritious food to eat, who am I to judge what their priority should be? So I feel like I'm not saying that. Okay, also I do not understand for sure what you mean by prostitution, because what I feel is that sex work or consensual trans what do you call it? Consensual transactions involving sexual services should be decriminalized, but prostitution in the sense somebody forcing another person to do sex work should not be allowed with or without the COVID. So the lockdown cannot be an excuse to have a blanket ban on human interactions, but we have to see what is appropriate, and there should be greater autonomy for decision making at the individual level, at the community level, at the district level, depending upon the then prevailing situation, rather than a comprehensive ban on all of human interactions. And ultimately, I would say we have to see what is the risk, not only the COVID risk, but factor the risk overall for that individual and see what's best for them. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. One question out of curiosity, I would like to ask this. What words would you give to people who are under a stigma or distress to disclose their sex difference just because of the communal stigma that they might impose upon the individual?
To whom is this question, Margavijan?
There is a question, ma'am.
Yeah.
Happy answered by anybody, ma'am.
Okay, I'd like to add to what Delphina madam said and Ajinder Walia madam also said. Delphina ma'am said, vulnerable people are more vulnerable during difficult situations. So, whether it is a pandemic or any crisis, man-made or natural disaster, during such times, the vulnerable people, their vulnerabilities increase. And it compounds the problem. And the solution, it is further. And then, talking about what Ajinder Walia madam said. See, during the pandemic also, we have heard about the contributions by the transgenders, by the women also. I'm talking about the Amma canteens that we have in Tamil Nadu. It is a self-help group run by the women only. And there are 200 wards in Chennai city. There are 406 Amma canteens. Almost every ward has got two canteens, one or two canteens. Throughout Tamil Nadu, there are more than 600. And any disaster and every disaster, even during Corona, the canteens are open. Women come early in the morning and they do the work. And like earlier, it was just they have to eat there. But during the pandemic, it was free. It was low budget canteens. 5 rupees or 3 rupees, you get food. But during the pandemic, government declared that free food will be given, and it is prepared by the women in those canteens. So they braved the corona, they braved the odds, and they used to reach the places to do that. And even transgenders, eateries, their things we have heard in abundance during the pandemic. So good things have happened, but the vulnerable section of the population become even more vulnerable, and they are rising up from that is something very difficult, and it has to be ensured by all the stakeholders that their lives are also secure and their vulnerabilities are addressed. So with that I end. You can go to the next question. Thank you, Madhavijan.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question is to Delphina, ma'am. Regarding vaccination, to what extent the transgenders had been benefited, or do they face any difficulty in having access to vaccination?
Thank you for the question. I amn't sure that I have seen any statistics on what percentage of the trans community particularly has been vaccinated, but anecdotally we know that many people have got the vaccines, when especially when they have the identity cards, they are able to go to the regular clinics or the healthcare centers and get the vaccination. But I think this is of a particular concern to those trans people who either do not have any identity cards, or the only identity cards identification documents they have, like voter ID and UID and pass or a PAN card, or in a name and gender that do not match them. And very often they do not even go to the center for fear of being stigmatized and discriminated when their appearance does not obviously match what is on the identity card. Like, I think if you have a card as a female and you have a mustache, you are going to be made fun of and ridiculed. So a lot of people may choose not to go there. I think the solution to this, I would suggest, should be to allow vaccination without asking for any identity card. I mean, if somebody wants a certificate of vaccination, say for international travel or something, I'm also in principle against the idea of vaccine passports. I think vaccine is more an individual and community responsibility, not something that the state should enforce and supervise, but rather facilitate and encourage. So if we can do away with the requirement for identity cards, I'm sure a lot of trans people would be benefited.
Thank you, ma'am. Next question to Sharwani, ma'am. Do you think victims of domestic violence are even more prone to that during pandemic, as because they are confined within their walls 24/7?
Yes. See, no alcohol, no economic, no salary, and the bleak economic future. And within the four walls, no schools, no colleges, no daycare centers. Everybody within the four walls, small places they have. See, already domestic violence incidents would be there, prone to domestic abuse, prone to abuse. But in these instances, they are stressed, and the stress can be shown on those at home because they cannot go out, and they cannot go out talk to their friends. Whether it is whoever it is, man or women or children, they'll be everybody will be irritated, and so what happens is that in such a situation, and everybody is hungry all the time, no tea shop, no hotels, no small time eateries. So where do they go? And they'll be pestering people at home. So these are normal happenings, but it is heightened during abnormal times. And now the normal has become abnormal has become the new normal. And so all would be intensified. Everybody will have mental issues. Everybody will be dissatisfied, and so there will be problems. Right? Thank you.
Thank you,
I
ma'am.
think it's time for us to.
Ma'am, last one question from my end. What is the word of motivation that you can offer to people who are having distress and still strangulated to disclose their difference in sex for the fear of the social stigma?
Unless and until we are able to confide in others, or the close circle, your friends, your relatives, somebody, there should be somebody, they may not express, but people at home should find out. See, suddenly there's a change in their attitude, in their activity. They are always some gloomy atmosphere. So either they have to tell. When they decide to tell, it means that they have understood the problem. They have not realized that they are into depression, All these is added. So many suicides we are hearing from big people. Those around them, they should keenly watch. Why is everybody suffering? So even this will be over. Let us come out of that. So more of support, more of soft words, and more of hope-giving words and deeds are the need of the hour to ensure that we care for ourselves, care for our mental well-being, and care for the mental well-being of others and their general well-being. So we have to be alert for that.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer,
Thank you.
ma'am.
I think
it's time
Ajinder
to.
Walia madam has raised her hand. Yeah, Ajinder
ma'am.
Walia madam has raised her hand.
Yes, ma'am. I would just like to add to it, that, these are times of physical distancing, but we need to socially connect to each other. And if we have to, socially connect to each other, we should be talking, through video chats, through, other online mediums. And that is one thing which is going to really play a good role in our mental health. We need to have a specific routine for the day. And in that routine, we should take some time out for doing, yoga exercises, breathing exercise. This will also, help in, having a good mental health and talking to people. And one important thing is, refrain from infodemic. Infodemic means there is so much of information given by all channels, and this information is not reliable. And the more we listen, the more, we get into a state of panic. So we should listen to only credible and reliable information once or twice in a day. So these things will play a great role, in ensuring that we are, feeling our mental health is a little better, and of course, the thumb rule goes, you can physically distance yourself, but remain socially connected to each other. So it's not social distancing, it is just physical distancing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajinder madam. As you said, like social distancing can be there, but still physically when we are mentally we have to connect. We'll have to keep in touch with the right persons. And now the terms positive and negative has different connotations. So first, me time, care for yourself and care for others.
Thank you, ma'am. Time for gratitude. I would now request Dr. S. Rajalakshmi, Assistant Professor, Senior Grade, and Head Criminal Law and Criminal Justice Administration, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
People changed a lot of other personal things all the time. They dyed their hair and dieted themselves to near death. They took steroids to build muscles and got breast implants and nose jobs. So they do resemble their favorite movie stars. Cosmetic surgery, aesthetic surgery, so on and so on. They change names and majors and jobs and husbands and wives. They change religion and political parties. They moved across the country or the world, even changed nationalities. Why was gender the one scared thing we weren't supposed to change? Who made that rule? Why can't they be the way they want to be? Why labeled? Why humiliated? Why discriminated? Why pandemic gender challenges? If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about answers. Webinar like this paves way for future research. Thank you, organizers. Good evening, everyone. Gratitude is one of the least articulate of emotions, especially when it is deep. We have reached the end of this beautiful webinar organized by Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University in association with the National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India. I would like to take this opportunity to record my heartfelt thanks to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. N.S. Santosh Kumar sir, for the right support, guidance, encouragement, and his involvement in all the series of knowledge dissemination webinars with Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. Thank you, Vice Chancellor sir. I extend my thanks to Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director, National Institute of Disaster Management, for his initiative and efforts to make today's webinar successful. I offer my sincere thanks to our Registrar, Director of UG Courses, Professor Dr. V. Balaji sir, who have been fortunate to have him as Registrar Director for his kind support and guidance for all the efforts we take up. Thank you, sir, for giving the welcome address. I wholeheartedly thank respected R. Srinivasan, sir, Controller of Examination, respected Kumta Ratna, Madam, Director PG Studies, respected Director R. Harita Devi, Director Research and Publication, for their support for the success of today's webinar. I extend my generous thanks to Professor Dr. K.S. Sharvani ma'am for her continuous efforts in organizing today's webinar and her valuable contribution to the university's intellectual platform. Thank you, madam. A big thank you to masters of today's ceremony. Yes, the expert speakers. Mr. Gautaman Ranganathan, sir, Assistant Professor, O.P. Jindal Law School, New Delhi, Fulbright Fellow, LGBTIQ activist. Thank you, sir. Professor Dr. K.S. Sharvani, madam, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Dalfina, madam, LGBTQIQ activist Nirangal. Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us with your inspiring and thought-provoking lecture and very much active. All the resource persons were very much active in responding to the questions posted by our participants. Thank you, expert speakers. I extend my deepest sense of appreciation and would place on record my heartily thanks to the organizing team because of whom we made this event possible. Thank you, organizing team. Webinar Director, Professor Dr. K.S. Sharvani, Madam. Coordinator Ajinder Walia, Assistant Professor, National Institute of Disaster Management, New Delhi. Coordinator Sri Rahul Rahu, Assistant Professor, the Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University. I also thank all the faculty members, students, research scholars, and other participants for your wonderful active participation. I would like to thank our technical team, Dr. S.K. Ashok Kumar sir, Mr. Darwin, and others who effectively worked for the smooth functioning of today's webinar. I also offer my thanks to Mr. Madhavijayan for moderating today's webinar. Thank you, Madhavijayan sir.
Thank you.
I sincerely apologize if I missed out on somebody. Thank you all for gracing the occasion by your valuable presence. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I request all the participants to fill in the